Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Fairberg, and welcome to today's edition of the Coaching Cafe. And it's one I'm delighted to be having because it's a good catch up with my old friend, John Drysdale. John, welcome to the Coaching Cafe this week.
Thanks for asking me, Dave.
And today, the reason I've asked you on, John, is because I want to have a discussion around the topic of leadership. I know there'll be many times this has been spoken about, especially in for business and self, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it because John has an accredited centre for delivering Institute of Leadership and Management qualifications around leadership and management development. So I think he's well placed, and also with his career that he's had, to have seen some great ideas of leadership and some not so great. So I thought I'd pick your brains about those types of things today, right, John. So my first question for you is, what would be your ideal definition of leadership?
Well, that's well, start with an easy one.
I thought so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you go and Google leadership, there's going to be thousands and thousands of references to leadership. There's been countless books written about leadership, and there are many different definitions of leadership. I think it's easier to kind of describe what leadership kind of is sort of characteristics of it, rather than just have a kind of like a sentence, really. But for me, it's something. There's two aspects of it, I think, really, if you break it down. One is the ability to create a vision that people want to follow. Yep. So there's something there about the leader, how they communicate that vision and purpose. And the second is enabling people to achieve that vision. So it's the creation of the vision for people, and it's engendering that following to achieve that vision. And so bring those two things together. For me, it sort of encapsulates leadership, what leadership might be. We might be getting close to a kind of definition of leadership there.
Oh, I really like that idea of having the vision, because it is one that we talk about a lot in business and in life in general, whether it's goals or visions or things you want to do and achieve, and then having the ability to gather people around that vision. I think that's an excellent definition of leadership, John. And would you say the difference between, I don't know, leadership and management for you, because obviously these are both topics and subjects that you deliver on and work with the work that you do for the ILM. What would you say they are?
Yeah, we do that, and it's sort of part of the criteria. So if you're doing a qualification, you might be asked to differentiate between those two things. And I was doing a seminar, a workshop with a company down in Doncaster, and we had a slide, what is leadership, what is management, and asked them to maybe identify themselves first before we did the big reveal. I think management for me is there's something there about consistency and continuity, and it usually takes place within certain parameters or a certain framework of operation. And you would certainly possibly see, for example, a job description around a management type role. It would say this is what the manager does, what the responsibilities are. And it's generally, I describe it as doing things right. So it's that kind of consistency, that's kind of, turnover of activity and meeting certain goals. And there's that continuity and consistency to management. When we get to leadership, it's much looser. It's much harder. There's no particular framework for leadership. There might be some principles that, again, you can maybe read one of those books I was referring to about leadership, but there's no real kind of framework around it. It's about the individual. It's about the character of the individual. It's against their ability to convey that message. It's their ability to get a group of people together to achieve something extraordinary. And there's something transformational about it. So it's no longer about consistency. It's about something perhaps progressive or forward thinking. And I often think it's something that maybe takes place towards the future. If we look at a timeline, then leadership is more sort of future focused, whereas management might be more about the here and now. And the phrase we use for leadership is doing the right thing. So when we're doing things right, this is about doing the right thing. So we'll find that leadership is, encompasses things like our values, our purpose, why we're here, why we're doing this.
I like that. So is there a subtle difference there in the phraseology you said, doing the right thing or doing things right?
Yeah.
Would you say then doing the right thing can sometimes mean not necessarily, I want to say, sorry, doing things right is not necessarily, does that mean that sometimes you're not quite doing things correctly, or you're doing them wrong, or you're just doing the thing that needs to be done then?
When in management terms?
Yeah, I'll just pause that there.
Yeah,
I'll ask
yeah.
that question
Just
again.
rephrase that one.
Yeah. What I was thinking about was to do the right thing or doing things right.
Yeah.
And so the aim of my question was to think about, so doing the right thing, so doing things right and doing the right thing, are they two different things? And when could you give us an example of what that would be?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point there, John, where you mentioned doing the right thing or doing things right. So can you give us maybe an example of the difference between that bit of phraseology?
Yeah, I think they can coexist. But sometimes you have to do what's necessary, and I think that leadership requires sometimes. I always talk about people putting their head above the parapet. That might be an old-fashioned expression, sort of medieval kind of military type expression, isn't it? But it's putting your head above the parapet, and it can be quite dangerous because you're doing the right thing, and it might not be the most expedient thing or the thing that everybody wants you to do, or it might not be the absolutely correct thing that it says in the manual. But it's the right thing to do in that situation. That's where we talk about situational leadership. We had just in the last week, I chair a committee on a charity, and we had a really robust discussion about a decision, and it involved finances, and it involved authority to go ahead or not go ahead with certain projects. And if we'd stuck to the dot the I's and cross the T's, it would have required an extra committee to oversee that decision. But the decision was really quite urgent, and there was quite a lot at stake. And I chaired that committee. I said, look, I'm quite happy for us to do it the way that was proposed, which kind of allowed us to make a decision. I still feel it was the right decision. It was grounded. It was the right thing to do because we faced consequences if we didn't make that decision there and then. But it was right for people to point out that actually, by the letter of our constitution, this is what should happen. But we couldn't afford to wait for that to happen. It needed a decision there and then. And so I was quite happy to do that. And I think sometimes, provided we're not talking about, health and safety and those things where it's life or death, I think it's okay to do that. And as long as, I can put my hand up and say, that's the decision we made on that night, and here's why we made that decision. I may be right, I may be wrong about that, but I'm prepared to argue that decision on that basis. So that's maybe an example of maybe highlighting the doing things right correctly to the letter of the Constitution, or doing making a decision because a decision somebody had to make that decision there and then, because the consequences beyond that were quite severe.
Yeah. Thanks, John. That was an excellent reply. So, John, my next question leads on to a recent conversation we had about different personality styles of introvert and extrovert. We had that conversation recently. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a common misconception that extroverts make good leaders ahead of more introverted styles people? And where does that show up for you?
Yeah, it's very timely, isn't it? There's a lot going on a sort of national scale around leaderships, past and present. I think there is far too much emphasis. I'm not going to get political here, but there's far too much emphasis on personality, as some sort of leadership trait. I think it's much more useful to think about character, and by character I mean that things like trust we really need to trust our leaders, don't we? So if someone wants us to follow them or follow their viewpoint, we kind of have to trust where they're taking us. And I think there's a big absence of trust, if I'm honest, in public life. I think the public do not trust the people who are leading us. And I just wonder whether a lot of that is to do with this kind of, this kind of populist nature of personality and, kind of like presidential type figures. And what do you think? Do you like them or do you not like them? And for me, all that stuff's completely irrelevant. It's about whether someone has a character to lead. Do they have the right traits and competencies to properly lead? And this brings us back again and again to values. I keep returning to values. And I think anyone watching this who's leading a team or a business, one of the things you can do is to consider your own values as a leader. When push comes to shove, what are the 3 or 4 underpinning values that guide the way you lead? And if you can't answer those, you really need to dig deep and find answers to those, because you'll get found out if you can't point to your core values, and the decisions you make and the responsibilities you take, of what's the values that underpin those. And I think that maybe that's why I think leadership seems to be a misunderstood concept here and now. And I think we need to reclaim the ground on that and say, this is what we expect of our leaders. And for me, it's about character. It's not about personality.
Okay. I like that a lot. Leads us nicely into the next question, and which is, do you think leaders are born or can be made?
Yeah, that was certainly used to be a question, excuse me, question that was asked a lot. Leaders born or made? And, in the early days of leadership theory, they talked about great man theory. So if we, even as fairly recently as like someone like Churchill, for example, so it tended to be this kind of a great man, and they tend to come from sort of military sort of background, wasn't it? And it was sort of the notion was that people were kind of born into being these natural leaders. And I think that, obviously, so as we come up to date with leadership through the years, we've started to explore what is leadership, like the question you asked me, and what are some of the characteristics of leadership and the traits of leadership. And the function of leadership. What does leadership actually do? And as we start to explore that, we think, well, okay, maybe we can develop some of these competencies and these traits. So I think that some of the natural leaders are like anything in life. It's you watch your football a lot, don't you? So there's people like really natural footballers, aren't they? They've just got the gift of that. Some can be good to average footballers, and a few people could develop a few footballing skills if you trained them enough. They could probably kick a ball or do whatever it is. And I think it's the same with leadership. I think that most of us could probably develop some really good leadership skills. I think it's something that we can practice, and I often talk about the practice of leadership. And I think that's maybe an area that's slightly different from management as well. I think possibly, but you could argue either way. But I think that leadership is something that you develop through practice, and it's that practice of leadership, being exposed to different leaders and being able to have discussions like we're having today about what's the nature of leadership and how do I situate that in my day-to-day life and my job and my business. That's how we develop leadership. I think it's not just about going on a course and learning something. It's about developing the practice of leadership. And I think, to answer your question, I think most people could develop some good leadership skills. There may be people who are outstanding and have a natural characteristic and within them to make them natural leaders, but I think most of us can develop as good leaders.
And the lead, it's interesting that, because I've recently delivered a couple of workshops around resilience, and I've used some examples of, these workshops were delivered to young girls. And so I used some good women as examples of where they would have leadership thrust upon them through tragic personal circumstances.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about people like G. Walker, and Margaret Aspinall.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you'd have spoke to them before these tragic events happened while they're wandering around their local supermarket, and then tell them that they're going to be leading these organizations that are going to go to Parliament and get changes in the law, they'd have looked at you and gone, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, and
I wouldn't do that.
I call that emergent leadership.
Yeah.
Or emerging leadership. So it's leadership that emerges from a particular situation.
And do you think they've always had that within them, or do you think the event sparks something for them?
I think again, maybe if we dug deeper, we're able to speak to G about that maybe there are some characteristics that she could maybe point to in her upbringing, or you know, her sort of background. So when those tragic events happened, we're able maybe to tap into, you know, the sense of justice, a sense of values. I'm imagining, I don't know this, I'm just hypothesizing here, but there may be something in their background that's kind of given them a bit of but they maybe haven't recognized it as leadership. That's the thing. It hasn't been, in other words, salient. I often talk about the salience of leadership, which is the prominence of it. It becomes prominent to them. So at the point those events happened, that leadership was suddenly important. You know, I want to set up a charity to combat this stuff. You know, that leadership suddenly became really important for them, became salient in their lives, and they started to practice it as a thing that they do.
I think it's the vision. It's what you talked about before. All of a sudden, their life they were presented with a new vision. They'd seen a vision of what their life had happened to them, and they wanted to create a different vision.
That's it, yeah.
So then they were able to see the vision they wanted to create, and then bring people along, because enough of the people, you know, unfortunately, those events were catalysts, if you like, for enough other people to be motivated enough to come along and to act on that vision, I think.
Yeah, I think it's that precisely. It's at that moment is that awareness of the vision and how to create a better society, a better community, or a better workplace. It's those things that I think help define leaders. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, John. So my next question then is around leadership being a lonely place.
Okay. Yeah.
Does it have to be or not?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think it can be. I think, and people in charge of organizations will recognize this, that the higher they go in the organization, then possibly the lonelier it gets. And it's why I think it's useful. I know you've run these events, Dave, so it's of action learning type events where you've got communities of leaders coming together to discuss their current challenges. And I always recommend that. And, you know, regardless of which size of business you're running, there's probably some sort of forum that you could be part of where you don't have to be burdened by that sole responsibility. There's other people in a similar situation to you. So if you're, you know, turning over 1 million, 10 million, 20, whatever it is, there's probably people in the same boat. And I do think it's useful for you to be able to share those experiences. And it's why you and I get asked as coaches to work with people. I think sometimes it's just that, actually, I need to talk to someone about this. I need to, you know, run my ideas. Even if it's just, you're just a kind of sounding post for people to verbalize their ideas and, you know, what's going on in their mind, then that's a really useful place. But because I think, yeah, it can be really, really, really lonely up there, and especially, you know, when times are tough.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you need that support. So regardless of where you are in the organization, I'd recommend that there must be some forum for you to share that burden with someone.
Yeah, I agree. I think a common theme that comes out around the loneliness of it is, or the potential for it to be lonely, is when a leader thinks they need to have all the answers. And I keep speaking to them about this and go, you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to have enough of the right ones, and then be open enough to go and share and find out where you can get the answers to the questions you don't know. That's the thing for me. As long as you've got enough of the answers, that's really cool. You're not going to know everything. So then you need to go and find a space where you can get the answers to the questions that you don't know. And there'll always be stuff you don't know.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about one of the reasons the human is probably one of the most popular species on the planet is our curiosity. And I think we lose that sometimes. Curiosity is a skill. We think we know things. And I think it's a real skill of leadership is to stay curious. We experience stuff, we do stuff for long enough so we think we know it. And then we forget to be curious. And you look at the wonder of a little 3, 4, or 5-year-old, what their imagination and curiosity is like. And as we get older and we develop and we begin to see answers to things, I think we lose that ability to be curious. And I think good leaders are always curious.
Yeah, I think that's a great notion. Certainly when we've run programs around leadership, and we're very fortunate, it's quite a few years ago now, but running programs for SME leaders in particular. And it was great for those guys because they hadn't really thought about themselves as leaders before. And then they were in a cohort of other leaders. And it was great to see their journey in starting to explore some of the stuff, which is pretty available. If you work in a large organization, you probably get some leadership training or there's some sort of leadership development. And these guys hadn't had that. And they were, really curious and the way that they interacted as a group and finding out how do you run your business? And they actually did exchange visits and things where they, went into each other's businesses to find out how they did things. And it was that kind of curiosity, I think is really important. And I think the other word is humility.
Yeah.
Jim Collins talks about this, about the humility of leadership. And certainly transformational leaders having that as a trait, the sort of driving passion, but coupling that with humility. So they may not seem like they fit, but they can fit. And the humility and being able to admit that you don't know everything and that you might need some help along the way, I think is a really key characteristic as well.
Love that. Yeah, I think it is 100%. So, John, final question.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say would give as the number one tip for someone who was starting out on a leadership journey?
Starting out. So, I mean, let's maybe imagine someone taking on a role that's got some sort of leadership thing within, maybe within its title or its description. I think the number one tip, I think, is about connection. So it's about connecting with the people you're expected to lead. Because without that you're not a leader, really. Again, you could maybe be a manager. You could maybe even be a dictator if you wanted to be. You could tell people what to do. And they might do that for a short time. But in order to truly lead, like I said earlier, I think trust is a huge thing. And if you're new to a role, it's going to take you a little while to build trust. People are going to want to know, about you. Are you up to the job? Are you credible? Are you interested in them, or is it just about your own agenda? All of those things get in the way of trust. So you're going to have to kind of almost like dismantle that and show people that you really care, that you really give a stuff about them and what they do. And I think it's probably, I always think maybe about the first 100 days in a sort of leadership role. Your first 100 days, what are the things you're going to do? One of the main things I think would be getting around everyone and just having that chat, that cup of coffee, that conversation, finding out, do they have grandkids? Are they interested in football? What's the thing they do outside of work? How can the workplace be a better place for them? What are their aspirations? Where do they see themselves? All of those conversations we could quite freely have. And we almost need to almost like park the organizational stuff while we're doing that. This is about me and you, and how I can help lead you. So that would be my main thing is how to connect best with the people you expect to lead. And that might be a long process. You might need to be patient with that, but that would be my number one tip, because without that, I don't think you can do any of the other stuff.
I love that. Without connection, there's nothing to follow, nothing to lead. So yeah, connection is a great tip. So John, thanks for that. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great.
So I can't believe people in my network won't know who you are and what you do. But for those who may not know, so just as a brief synopsis of what you're up to, John. What's going on in your world at the minute?
Yeah, it's been a big change since we worked together on Merseyside, and I'm now based in Fife in Scotland. So I made a decision to just change my lifestyle, and I live in rural Fife in a beautiful part of the world, and really enjoying that. I work, I suppose there's two main audiences. I work with some small business owners, so on a one-to-one basis, and do a lot of coaching in that. A lot of similar stuff to what you do, Dave. So a lot of the referral marketing and relationship development and how they grow their business. And my other target audience is mainly it's large organizations, and it's mainly in the higher education field. So I have a number of clients who are universities. I really enjoy that sector. There's lots of leadership challenges. There's lots of opportunities as well. I find it stimulating working with some really clever people, and the work they do is interesting. And I love going into these institutions and seeing the young people going about their stuff. And yeah, it's all good. So I'm working with a number of them on things like leadership. You mentioned the ILM programs, so qualifications of leadership management, coaching and mentoring is another thing. We're getting asked for a lot of coaching type skills. How do we develop coaching skills in our leaders? And again, I find that a really interesting thing to do. So yeah, so hoping to grow my client base of higher education people, as well as the SME business owners who want a bit of help with their business.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, John. So if people want to find you to help either develop themselves as coaches and get some formalized qualifications from there, or to get you in to their organization and help you develop their coaches and leaders inside the organizations, where do they find you? What's the best way to get hold of you?
A couple of easy ones. So I'm on LinkedIn as John Drysdale. So I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. So you'll find me there. Or noguru.net is our website. And I'm working on an individual site, which will be me, but maybe you can have me back on again and we'll talk about what's happening there.
That would be great. It's always a pleasure to catch up with my old friend,
thank you,
Johnny Drysdale. So, John, thanks so much for that.
No, thanks
really
for
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Have a great week.